one of my favourite people, and I pinch myself that I even know him sometimes, is Steve Stoliar, who was Groucho Marx's secretary and archivist for 3 years in the 1970s, and has appeared on this show as our man in Los Angeles. Welcome back to the show, Steve Stoliar.
Thanks. It's great to be back. I missed hearing your dulcet and Franchot tones over the phone.
Whatever happened to Franchot Tone? Dead, of course.
He's still dead, yes.
Didn't he marry Joan Crawford?
Yeah.
Not for very long.
No. He did that wonderful Twilight Zone about making a bet with the guy who said he wouldn't speak for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And you look at it, and it's very artfully photographed with Franchot tone and profile in a lot of scenes. And then you read about it and find out it's because he got into a drunken brawl in a parking lot, and half of his face got scraped up.
Ooh.
So they had to only shoot the other side of his face for half the show.
And wasn't he in, I think he was in Advise and Consent, an underrated movie.
Yeah, he played the president, and he's probably best known for Roger Byam in the 1935 Mutiny on the Bounty.
That's right. You're quite right, of course. A great cineast is our Steve Stoliar. Now, you wrote a book, which I read in Istanbul in 1996. A kind friend saw it on the bookshelves and knew that I would love it. I knew of your existence well before that, in the 70s. I think there's a picture of you in the Groucho file. Mm-hmm. With Groucho Marx and your idol, with whom you went to work. And I remember feeling in the 70s that, like every Marx Brother fan, madly jealous of this Steve Stoliar. And then I was thrilled to read your account, a belated account of your time working for the great Groucho when it was first published, I presume, in 1996. And now, happily, it's been republished in a second edition in a paperback with a wonderful cover, replete with endorsements from Jack Lemmon, Woody Allen, Steve Allen, and Dick Cavett, no less. I'm getting to a question, Steve.
That's all right. You can sing my praises in whatever key you want.
Do you still pinch yourself all these years later that you were there with the great man?
Now wait, in English terms, pinch means to steal, doesn't it?
No, that's American. I mean, do you have to sort of think, what did it really happen, or did I dream it?
Yeah, it is like that, and I have lately been going over again the interview that I videotaped with him in his house in '74.
Yes.
And it's so vivid. Without watching it, I remember sitting on the living room floor at his place and asking him questions from my list of topics, and then he sings a few songs. And I mean, when I see that again, there's also footage of me at UCLA talking to him when we were publicizing trying to get Animal Crackers re-released.
This is how you came into his life, because you were a student at UCLA, and Animal was in the middle of the Marx Brothers revival, which was huge in the 70s, thank goodness. And the Marx Brothers were suddenly... And wasn't he lucky to see that, to live through that? So few are.
He was. There are a lot of... Hollywood giants and comedy giants like Stan Laurel and Buster Keaton, who didn't live long enough to see that whole renaissance, and when people would look back and say these guys were geniuses and have film festivals and all that. So instead you had, Buster Keaton doing commercials for Mobil Gas, and Stan Laurel just in retirement in an apartment in Santa Monica, and I think his name was even in the phone book because he just didn't get that many fans pestering him. But Groucho lived to see himself die a living legend, I guess you could say.
Yes.
And it began in the late 60s when the anarchy of the Marx Brothers really resonated with the baby boomers, and the whole anti-establishment, anti-authority zeitgeist swept over that generation.
Yes, and also they were funny.
and also they were funny.
Yes.
W.C. Fields and Mae West, and those three comedy groups were re-embraced by a whole new generation.
Because they were up yours, as we would say here. You know, all of them were anti-authoritarian.
Right.
Even Mae West in her own way was a sort of but no, he and I remember. So I came to it because, as you know, Stephen, I've said many times, because I'm oddly proud of it. It was a key moment of my life. My first memory is my father waking me up, putting me in a dressing gown, probably at 11 o'clock at night, and propping me up in front of a black and white television to watch Duck Soup. And it was one thing I had with my father, this love of the Marx Brothers, which we shared. So I grew into that whole revival. It was always part of me. One of the few books we had in the house was Groucho's autobiography, and it becomes very personal to you. And Groucho became a god to me. I was driving to a rehearsal one day in 1977, I think it was, and I thought, Groucho's dead. And and he died that day. I just had this premonition of his death.
Wow!
And there were a lot of books that you worked on. You worked with Hector Arche on that, the best of the biographies. Not Richard Annabile. That was before your time.
That was before my time. Although I was involved with the lawsuit against him that Aaron Fleming, the woman in charge of Groucho's life, and Groucho lodged against him because of the spicy language in the Marx Brothers scrapbook, which Groucho actually said, but she figured she'd sue just the same, and I was caught having to sit with a Xerox transcript of the interviews that Nobile did with Groucho and go over them with a yellow highlighter, which essentially blurred all the letters because the Xeroxes were cheap, and trying to compare it to how it ended up in the final book, and it was sort of a fruitless thing. But
you say Nobile,
Nobile and Hector Arce.
Right.
Worked on the Secret Word is Groucho about You Bet Your Life and the Groucho File, and also wrote the first definitive biography of Groucho called Groucho.
Steve Stoliar, my guest here on 891 Evenings. His book is Raised Eyebrows, My Years Inside Groucho's House, in the new expanded edition, readily available, especially on the internet. Steve, so you're a student at UCLA, and you and others petitioned, was it Paramount, to re-release Animal Crackers, which hadn't been seen for generations?
Actually, they made it for Paramount in 1930, and then in the early 50s, MCA Universal bought this entire package of old Paramount films. All the pre-49 Paramount films became MCA films, and it was included with it, but they didn't have the right to release it because the copyright had lapsed and reverted back to the authors of the play.
Yes.
George Kaufman, Maury Riskind, and then the composers Burt Kalmer and Harry Ruby. And Universal just didn't think there was anything to be gained by spending the money to untie the legal knot and put out this old black and white movie.
So it was unavailable.
Right. This is difficult. I'm finding that it's very difficult for Generation X and younger to understand the idea that there was this lost masterpiece that Universal had in its vault and didn't care enough to bother putting out, because now, of course, you've got all these DVDs with rare footage and restored and digitally restored and with original trailers and all this stuff and rare shorts and movies you've never heard of. And here was the Marx Brothers' second film, the one that Hooray for Captain Spaulding came from, and a lot. I shot an elephant in my pajamas, and a lot of famous material. And they say to me, well, how could Universal not realize that there'd be millions of people waiting to see this? And it's like, well, in the early 70s, they didn't care about an old black and white Marx Brothers movie. They were more interested in Airport 75 and Downhill Racer and their other, riveting offerings.
So you petitioned for the re-release, and this caught the notice of Aaron Fleming, who was Groucho's then manager, I think, stroke companion. And had the controversy about Aaron started even then?
No, I knew who she was because I was such a fanatic. I had to read everything that there was about Groucho. So I knew there was particularly an Esquire magazine in 1972, and the two of them were on the cover. And so when I got my first phone call from her, it was like the biggest thrill of my life, because I thought, oh my God, it's that woman from the cover of the magazine, the one who hangs out with Groucho, and she's calling me personally. So I knew there were no intimations of any dark side to their relationship or her personality. The only image you had from the press was that, Groucho, at this point in his life, was lucky to have this devoted woman looking after him.
He was in his 80s. She was in her 30s.
Right.
She was a sort of a would-be actress. She'd done little bits and pieces. She was in Everything You Wanted to Know About Sex But Were Afraid to Ask, the Woody Allen film, in a little cameo. What else did she do?
She was also in Hercules in New York with Arnold. Now listen to this, with Arnold Schwarzenegger and Arnold Stang.
Who's Arnold Stang?
He was a nerdy, bespectacled character actor that was in a lot of early Milton Berle shows. He did a lot of cartoon voices and commercials. And because it was so early in Schwarzenegger's career, his whole part was dubbed. So you're seeing Arnold Schwarzenegger in all of his brawny glory, but coming out of his mouth is like, I've been sent by Zeus from Mount Olympus to find a new place for... And she's one of the minor goddesses running around in some gown going, Zeus, Zeus, you must not let Hercules do this. She also did some stage work, and she was from Canada, and she had done work up there, and was looking to further her career, and ended up.
How did she meet Groucho?
She met Groucho through a mutual friend, Jerry Davis, who was a producer of the Odd Couple TV show. He had been a contract writer at MGM in the 50s and got into television production and won Emmys, and she was in his office, and Groucho called him, and he said, oh, I'm with this actress, Aaron Fleming, and Groucho said, well, that's interesting, because the only women Harpo ever dated were named Fleming, and he ended up marrying Susan Fleming. And so she went to work for him as a secretary initially, figuring, well, I'll hitch my wagon to this star somehow. She
got Groucho involved in the campaign to have Animal Crackers re-released, and re-released it was. And you attended the re-premieres in both Los Angeles and New York, in which, in the latter, you were nearly killed by a horse.
Groucho was. I didn't go to New York. I was only at the one in Los Angeles. He and Aaron went to the one in New York, and yes, there was inadequate police protection, and here was this frail... by this time, Groucho had had a couple of strokes and was, weaker and, in his mid-80s, and the people are pressing, crowds of people pressing in to try to see and hear and touch him, and apparently, from what I understand, it was pretty touch and go for a while until he got inside the theater.
And we forget, Steve, that this is the 70s, and I had two grandparents who had the 80th birthdays in the 70s, and it was unusual. 80 was a huge age then, and now two generations on, every second person's 80. William Shatner's 80.
Yeah, I know.
It's not unusual, but 80 was unusual then, wasn't it?
Yeah. What did I just hear today? Graham Nash. Today was Graham Nash's 70th birthday.
Who he?
And it's like, how can that possibly be?
Who's Graham Nash?
From the Hollies and from Crosby.
Right. So he was frail. What? He was a medium-sized man?
Yeah, I would say. I think he was about 5'7". All the brothers were short.
Yes.
And yes, getting into your 80s back in the 70s, especially before there was much awareness of cardio exercises and all that kind of stuff, that you just basically did what you want at your own pace, and so he was sort of an old 84 because his arteries and so on. But the mechanism that was Groucho was there all the way to the end. So it was delightful to hear him, twist a line and hand it back to me. I'd make a comment, and then he would like the fact that he liked to get the Hollywood trade papers and came to the lunch table one day and said, "Wonderful mail today, nothing but requests for money." And I said, "But you got Variety, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes, a variety of requests for money," which was phrased exactly as he would have phrased it back
and
then.
You do him well, Steve. You do that older, softer voice that we... See, I knew and still know Groucho at Carnegie Hall by heart.
Yeah.
And you can't get that on CD.
I know.
Except for illegally.
Yeah. Yeah, the LP, the double LP is still readily available for those who have turntables.
And even cassette tapes. But not...
Yeah, and people ask me as though I'm holding it back or something. Why isn't that out? I don't know.
It's a wonderful show. You saw that show in Los Angeles.
Yeah, I saw it in December of '72, and I wasn't prepared for how old he had gotten because the press had done such a good job of saying, good old Groucho at 80, just as sharp as ever. Yeah. And so it was something of a blow to see him shuffle out to the podium and in a kind of whispery voice tell his stories. But when I got to spend time with him, I found, people have asked me, were you disillusioned by the condition he was in when you went to work for him? And it's like, no, I was re-illusioned or whatever, because after seeing him in the cavernous Dorothy Chandler Pavilion, trying to entertain thousands of people, I found that one-on-one at the lunch table or in the living room or in his bedroom, he could be quite delightful and fascinating. I mean, he was a man from 1890, so he would be telling me things that he remembers firsthand.
The Spanish-American War.
Spanish-American War and the Wright brothers and the night President Harding died in 1923 and the show didn't get any laughs and you could hear the rain hitting the aluminum roof of the theater. I mean, vivid things from long ago. So it was a remarkable 3 years for me.
He never stopped working, Steve. But it was almost as though, he was still doing TV. He did Dick Cavett, he did talk shows, bits and pieces, that perhaps ill-advised final television appearance on that Bob Hope special in which he had Billy Barty, the dwarf actor, run round in the Groucho persona. But he was working at home, wasn't he? Your book is full of all those wonderful parties with the Hollywood elite of the day being entertained by Groucho, and he loved to sing.
He loved to sing, and the songs that he sang tended to have very intricate lyrics because they were those patter songs that Harry Ruby wrote, and or that Yip Harburg, like Lydia the Tattooed
Yes.
Lady, and there'd be songs with all these verses and all this wordplay, and it came back to him. It'd be someone at the piano, and he would steady himself, and he loved to sing. I remember one interviewer. There was a lot of press activity in '75 because he was turning 85. So various reporters were sent to interview him, and this one guy, he sang a song for this one reporter, and the reporter said, "Oh, that was wonderful. Where'd you learn to sing?" And Groucho said, "I've been singing all my life. Yes. Where did you learn to write? Or maybe you haven't." And somehow his rejoinders to them didn't seem to make it into their articles. Like a guy that asked him, it said, "How has movie making changed since when you and your brothers were making movies?" And Groucho said, "Well, back in the 30s, they didn't used to have any toilets near the sound stages, but all that's changed now." And the guy said, "Oh, how has it changed?" This is kind of so Groucho looked at him and said, "People don't piss anymore." Instead of saying, "Now there are toilets near the sun." You know, that didn't make it into the guy's article for some reason, because it didn't reflect well on him, even though, of course, that was much better than the question and answers that the guy came prepared for.
I get to talk to wonderful people. I get to meet wonderful people in this gig, Steve. And you were and so did you in that period, with Mae West coming to dinner, and George Burns and Georgie Jessel, and the world came. And what were they like? Who were your favorites?
My favorites, well, I loved Groucho's old friends who tended to be writers and directors and producers from years ago. I mean, he remained friends with the people who wrote for his films and were still around. As a matter of fact, in the room that was my office at his house, there was already, when I went to work there was a list on the bulletin board, and it was a list, and it said, "Marx Brothers writers still in town and still alive."
We neglected to say you went to work as his secretary archivist for 3 years.
Right.
Perhaps neglected to say that. Nunnally Johnson and his wife you particularly liked. What was Mae West at dinner?
Mae West was, she was something. She was very, very short, which is sort of a testament to her on-screen image. I mean, even though people tend to get shorter as they get older, nevertheless, she was like 4'11".
And was Paul Novak with her?
Yeah, he was with her factotum. And Erin was very nervous before Mae West came over, because she thought, this is like royalty. Yes. This is the queen of comedy. So she said to Groucho something you should never say to Groucho or to Dick Cavett or to me, which is, be on your best behavior. Don't say anything. This is the sort of thing that causes you to, set fire to the tablecloth or something.
Yes.
So, and it was very well known that Mae West and W.C. Fields couldn't stand each other when they were making My Little Chickadee, and used to have notes sent back and forth through an intermediary because they didn't want to have to talk to each other. So Mae West comes in, and the very first thing Groucho says is, "Hi, Mae, what do you hear from Bill Fields?" And she says, "In your dreams, Groucho, in your dreams." And Erin is quietly dying in the corner. And then at one point Groucho said, "Didn't they throw you into the pokey for indecency?" And she said, "Yeah, but I always managed to wriggle out of tight situations like that." And I just sat there thinking, I don't believe what I'm witnessing. I mean, it was like Jurassic Park. Here's the king and queen of Paramount comedy in the early 30s, and Harpo's son Bill Marks was there, and he played a kind of honky-tonk version of Frankie and Johnny, and she put one hand on the piano, and she didn't sing, but she did some rhyming reciting of a long body poem called Pleasure Man from I think it was from the show that she ended up being thrown in the pokey over. And it was just amazing. And I had her sign a book, and she wrote to Steve, sincerely, and she separated the sin from the sincerely. And she was a total original.
George Burns at the door?
Burns was great. Burns, I was nervous to meet him. This was before the renaissance of interest in him with the Sunshine Boys, because the time that he came over, Jack Benny was supposed to play that role, and was in rehearsal, and moving about quite smoothly to the point where Herb Ross had to say, Jack, remember, you're playing a man of 70, and at the time he was 75. So anyway, I got the door, and George Burns breezed in and said, you want to live a long time? Become an actor. You'll live to be an old man like Groucho and me. Okay, let's see. And again, I'm sitting there, again, the fly on the wall, except because it was very democratic at Groucho's, I was never viewed as, the help, having to eat in the kitchen or something. I was always welcome at the lunch table, so I was there for all these people.
Were they on? Were they working? Were they on?
It varied. There was at Groucho's 85th birthday party, Peter Sellers was there, and he absolutely melted into the wallpaper. It was, I don't even have a vivid recollection of him being there, even though I was a huge fan of Pink Panther and Strangelove and all that stuff.
But Groucho was on that day. He was singing.
Groucho was on. Burns tended to be on. But they talked about, vaudeville houses that they played in the teens. And at the end of lunch, Burns took out a cigar and he lit it up and he said, I never smoke expensive cigars. All I care is if it fits the holder. Milton Berle pays $2 for his cigars. If I paid that much for a cigar, I'd go to bed with it before I sleep.
Jack Lemmon was there.
Lemmon was wonderful. And Lemmon at the time was working on a television. I'd like to see this again. He did a TV remake of The Entertainer.
Yes, I've seen it. Yes.
Probably not familiar with Laurence Olivier, was a British actor. Anyway.
It's a wonderful film, the remake.
Yeah, it was. Ray Bolger played his father.
Brilliantly.
And Marvin Hamlish did music. And Lemmon said that he had met Olivier, and he said, how did you do such a convincing job of being a second-rate song and dance man? And Olivier said, by doing the very best I could, dear boy. So it was like, wow, that's pretty cool. And at the time he was appearing in Juno and the Paycock with Matthau at a theater in Los Angeles.
Yes.
And he said that he would put dirt under his fingernails because he's supposed to be this, grimy Irish guy, and people in the front rows could see, and it wouldn't be right for him to have immaculately manicured fingers. So
my guest is
he was a very warm and friendly man, and I miss him dearly.
My guest is Steve Stoliar, author of Raised Eyebrows, now in a new expanded edition. His memories of Groucho Marx, living in Groucho Marx's house, working for Groucho Marx in the 70s. It's said that no man's a hero to his valet, Steve, and you knew Groucho intimately. The book opens with you having to walk him to the toilet while he micturated, shall we say?
Yes.
And so you were as close to him as another man could get, really.
Well, he was he was, above all, he was, as I say, this man from 1890. That was something I think that Aaron Fleming either couldn't accept or was in denial over was the fact that he was first this aging man from the turn of the century, and second, this legendary entertainer, because she was, the pressure she put on him to rehearse and keep looking forward to a special and to be on and all that. And it's like we were all very frustrated that she wouldn't take more seriously the fact that he was in declining health and more fragile than she was allowing for.
But were there off days? Were there days when he was unfunny, when he was unhappy, when it just wasn't happening? There must have been, Steve.
Well, it varied. There were days when he was super sharp and days when he was kind of hazy, sleepy, or seemed kind of depressed. It's tough, because you're also dealing with geriatrics in addition to a man who kind of had a dark. I mean, he wasn't called Groucho just for the hell of it.
No.
He was a serious man. You talk about whether he was on. He was, but he also remained passionate about liberal politics and literature. He always looked forward to reading the newspaper every day and keeping up with books from some of his favorite writers.
Was he? Of course, he was lovable. Did you like him, Steve? Was he likable?
I did. I did like him. I mean, there were some people said that age had sort of softened him. That I really didn't have to put up with the withering tongue that he had in earlier years. Although, as I mentioned, like asking that writer, where'd you learn to write, or maybe you haven't. That was still there and remained there.
Because we forget.
Even the day that I met him, and I said, Groucho, I'm so happy to be meeting you after all these years, and he said, well, you should be. And Aaron said, this is a young man who's trying to get Animal Crackers re-released. And Groucho said, did you get it? And I said, not yet, but we're working on it. And he said, well, you better or I'll fire you. And I said, oh, I didn't realize I was working for you. How much are you paying me? And he said, a little less than nothing.
See, it's this tone, isn't it? You see, you can say pass the mustard in this voice, and it's funny.
Yeah. Well, he complained about that. He said, because he was so famous for his put downs, you couldn't insult someone that you really wanted to. I mean, if he were in a restaurant and said, this soup tastes like dishwater, then the waiter would be thrilled and say, wait till I tell the cook that Groucho insulted your soup and said it tasted like dishwater. Oh, boy, wait till I tell him, hey, Groucho said your soup is terrible. No, son, seriously, he said it tasted like dishwater.
Oh, dear. See, he worked till the end. And he said, it's okay to work for nothing, but don't work cheap. And that's helped me. We mustn't forget that this was a man, for all his genius, who turned all three wives into alcoholics, one daughter mad, one daughter into alcoholism, and his own son sued his own son twice.
Yeah. Well, I have a quibble with the idea of turning people into alcoholics, because I think you have to be predisposed, if not actively that way.
Women drank heavily around him.
Yeah. I mean, his second wife, Kay, had been married to Leo Gorcey of the Dead End East Side Bowery Boy Kids, and apparently she and Leo used to get into real drunken brawls with, broken bottles and slugfests and all. So, that was before she was even married to Groucho.
But he met his match in Erin, didn't he?
He did, because, as he got hazier, he grew more reliant on her, which fed her substantial ego. So she became more controlling, and he allowed her to be, because, really, his own family wasn't devoting themselves to looking after him.
I think,
and so it was like he was fortunate to have someone to look after him, but unfortunate that it was Erin Fleming, because she was a volatile, mercurial, and eventually, literally, mentally unbalanced woman, and that's a volatile combination.
Was the relationship sexual?
I don't think so, and I haven't. People make the natural assumption, "Oh, well, come on, you had to believe something was going on." Come on. But I never talked to anyone who had been around there or in any kind of position to have an informed opinion.
It's fair to say that his children didn't really like him, and the book, and I know that you've found this wonderful, and it's really the highest praise, that his youngest daughter, Melinda, said your book was really better than all the years of therapy that she had, and that is high praise, that you helped her understand her own father.
Yeah, it was so gratifying when I heard from her, because she has stayed out of the limelight. He used to bring Melinda out on You Bet Your Life once a season to do a little song and dance, and apparently
and she was in the
really
Mikado.
She was in the Mikado. I mean, she had some bit roles, and she was one of the dancers in Bye Bye Birdie, and she's here or there, but she really didn't. Her heart was not in showbiz, and she turned her back on that whole scene and moved to the rural parts of Northern California decades ago.
Steve, you were there while this enormous battle was going on, really, for the guardianship of Groucho and his estate, and you were right in the thick of that. It was the family v. Erin Fleming and her circle, really. But we also find out the tragic end of Erin Fleming, who kind of went mad, became a bag lady, and then what happened, Steve?
She was in and out of mental health wards and in assisted living facilities, and the final place that she lived was almost directly underneath the Hollywood sign. In 2003, April 15th, she shot herself in the mouth and left no note. We'll never know what the last straw was, but, I mean, she was diagnosed as a paranoid schizophrenic, and when she went off her medications, she was completely delusional by then.
But was she yet another woman destroyed by Groucho?
No, I can't say that. I mean,
but
well, first of all, I take exception to the idea that he destroyed his wives. I mean,
sure.
I don't know. It's the color of truth is gray. What did they bring to the thing? What were they predisposed? And but no, Erin. I mean, this was so many years after Groucho, and really, she was her own worst enemy. She would cultivate friendships and relationships, and then destroy them because she was so volatile. And her, there were a few friends that she had. And then when Groucho died, she sort of found out that she had fewer friends than she thought. And then by the time she died, there was essentially no one, because she put people through the ringer, having to bail her out and find places for her to stay and lend her money that they'd never see again. And so she ended up killing herself, and I don't know why she chose that day to say, "This is it. I don't want to see tomorrow."
How did this man change you?
I think that it must have been an extraordinary maturing process, because I was 19 years old and had no real experience with volatile personalities, but I ended up being the longest surviving employee there.
You went, as Dick Cavett said, through the looking glass, and you are witness, Steve Stoliar, and a generous, good man with it. And I thank you for what you did and what you've written, and for your work on this show and your friendship. And can you just close with, you can do him at the beginning of the Carnegie Hall concert. Dick Cavett names all the characters he played. Save your applause to the end, please. And then Marvin Hamlish plays Hooray for Captain Spaulding, and he comes on and he says, "Voiced, I'd like
to take a bow for Harpo and Chico." And it was Chico, because he chased chicks, so the people who say Chico understandably are wrong. I wanted to say that the book is probably most easily available on Amazon.com, And if people are of a mind to want a signed or inscribed copy, I do have a website now, which is just www.stevestoliar, STOLIAR.com, and I'll